They always tell you power is loud, that it announces itself with sirens and badges and people shouting orders, but that's not how it really works, not most of the time. Real power shows up quiet, in a look, in a tone, in the way someone decides who you are before you even open your mouth. That's how this started. One tired stop for water. One uniform. One cop who thought he had the whole world figured out. Yeah, that happened. I was 3 hours into a drive I didn't even remember starting. My hands knew the wheel better than my head did. I'd buried my mother that morning, stood there listening to dirt hit wood, shaking hands with people who kept saying she was proud of me, and I just needed air water, something cold to stay awake. I pulled into a gas station off a county road most folks only see when they're passing through. Heat sat on the place like it had nowhere else to be. I straightened my uniform out of habit, not for show. People think uniforms are about respect from others, but for me it was about respect for myself. I walked inside, grabbed a bottle of water, gum, nothing dramatic. I was thinking about getting back on the road, about how quiet the truck felt without her voice in my head anymore. The bell over the door went off hard sharp, like it was angry at somebody. I felt the room change before I even turned around. You know that feeling when the air tightens when you realize you're suddenly being measured? The deputy who walked in had that walk, chest out, slow steps, hand near his belt, like he was itching for a reason. He didn't look at my rank, didn't look at my ribbons, just locked onto me and decided I didn't fit whatever picture he had in his head. "Don't move," he said loud, like volume equals authority. My hand was halfway to my wallet and I froze. I'd learned a long time ago that sudden movements get misunderstood real fast. I asked him calmly what the problem was. He stepped closer. Too close, talking about a stolen truck, saying mine matched. It didn't. Not the color, not the plates, not anything that mattered. I told him that, told him who I was, told him my ID was right there. He didn't hear a word. He heard a challenge. He grabbed my shoulder and shoved me toward the counter. Not hard enough to knock me down, just enough to let me know he thought he could. I looked down at his hand, then back at his face, and told him to take it off me. Not yelling, not threatening, just clear. That's when his face changed, you know what I mean? That flash of embarrassment that turns into anger because someone didn't fold fast enough. He started talking into his radio, calling me non-compliant, saying I was impersonating military. That word stuck. Impersonating. Like 20-plus years of service could be reduced to a costume in his mind. Backup came in hot lights, flashing outside like this was some kind of action movie. Taser pointed at my chest. People watching. Phones out. I stood there, hands visible, told them I would comply, but I would not kneel in my uniform. That was it. They rushed me. Hands twisted behind my back, cuffs biting in too tight, shoulders slammed into the counter. Somebody cursed. Somebody else laughed. I didn't fight. Fighting is how you don't make it home. Fighting is how your story ends early. I let them do what they were going to do, and I started paying attention to details instead. Names, faces, the way the cuffs felt, the time on the wall clock. My cover fell off in the mess and landed on the floor. The deputy kicked it under his car like it was garbage. That one thing burned more than the shove, more than the cuffs. If you've worn a uniform long enough, you understand why. In the back of the cruiser, no air conditioning, heat pressing in. I closed my eyes and breathed slow. I wasn't panicking. I was cataloging. This wasn't the first time I'd been somewhere I didn't belong with people who had the power to hurt me. At the station, they dumped my wallet out, looked at my military ID for maybe half a second. "Good fake," the deputy said, like he was proud of himself. I asked them to call my base. They laughed. I was put in a cell and the door slammed shut with that heavy metal sound that tells you exactly where you stand. Time stretches in places like that. 2 hours felt like a whole day. I sat on the bench, back straight, hands still sore, thinking about how fast things can go wrong when the wrong person decides you're a problem. A younger deputy brought me water. She looked nervous. She looked at my ribbons, really looked, and I could see something click. She asked quietly if it was real. I told her yes, and I told her this was going to get serious. I asked for a phone call. She hesitated, then nodded when I explained what denying it would mean for her. Sometimes people just need permission to do the right thing. I dialed a number I hadn't used in years, gave a name, a code, said where I was. The line went quiet. 30 seconds later, a general I'd known longer than I'd known most of my neighbors was on the phone. I told him what happened, kept it clean, kept it factual. Assault, false arrest, uniform desecrated. Silence again, heavier this time. He told me to stay put. He said he was calling everyone. When the line went dead, even the deputy helping me looked pale. Things moved fast after that. You could feel it before you saw it. Phones ringing, voices dropping. The sheriff came storming through, demanding explanations. The deputy who arrested me doubled down, blamed the system, blamed me, said I acted suspicious. Then the building shook, engines outside, heavy ones. Doors flew open, and suddenly the room was full of people who didn't need to shout to be heard. A general in full dress uniform walked in and announced a federal investigation into the kidnapping of a service member. Kidnapping. That word changes things. He asked where I was. The deputy tried to talk. He didn't get far. They opened the cell. I stood, straightened my jacket, and came to attention. The general returned the salute. He said we were leaving. I shook my head. I told him not until I got my property back, and not until the man who took it returned it himself. Outside in front of cameras, the deputy crawled under his own car to retrieve my cover. He handed it to me with shaking hands. I looked it over, saw the scuff, the damage. I told him it would do as evidence. That's when the rest fell apart. Dash cam footage recovered despite claims it malfunctioned. Audio pulled from buffers he didn't know existed. A hidden box in his cruiser with cash and IDs. Patterns emerged. Travelers stopped. Property seized. A quiet scheme that everybody kind of knew about and nobody stopped. The sheriff was arrested. The deputy stopped talking. Real quiet. The trial went federal. Big courtroom, hard benches, rows of service members sitting silent behind me, not there to threaten, just to witness. The defense said it was a mistake, a bad day, a misunderstanding. The prosecution showed the footage. The kick, the words, the planning. Then the cashier from the gas station testified that the deputy had been waiting, calling it payday before he even saw who was driving. That was the moment the room shifted. You could feel it. The jury didn't take long. Guilty on every count. At sentencing, the judge talked about authority like it was something borrowed, something you have to give back clean. He talked about what happens when someone uses a badge like a weapon. 62 years, consecutive. The deputy broke down screaming that he was just doing his job as they dragged him away. I stood up, placed my cover back on my head, and nodded once. Not celebration, just acknowledgement. After that, things changed. Laws tightened. Cameras became mandatory. I used the settlement money to help people who didn't have the backing I did. I testified. I told the story again and again because silence is how this stuff survives. Years later, I visited the man who arrested me. Not to rub it in. To forgive him. Not for his sake. For mine. He looked smaller behind the glass. Older. I told him I forgave him, that I refused to carry him with me anymore. That hurt him more than anger ever could. So that's the story. One stop for water, one decision made too fast by someone who thought power meant ownership. 62 years later, people still argue whether the sentence fit the crime. Was it justice or was it an example? I want to know what you think. Have you ever been judged before you spoke, written off before you had a chance? Drop your thoughts in the comments, share your story. Because if we don't talk about this stuff, it keeps happening in places nobody's looking.